This is Universal Design for Learning Practical Applications, and I'm Kimberly Berry, AT teacher for AbleTech. Joining us from AbleTech is Allison Robinson, speech language pathologist. She's going to be presenting along with Angela Kwok, who is an expert on Universal Design for Learning from the State Department of Education. We're very excited to learn Angela's ideas for incorporating UDL into the classroom, and Angela will be commenting with ideas for AT throughout the presentation. Before we get started, just have a few little details to talk about. Let's see, I went to the wrong slide there. I just wanted to point out that we will have certificates that we will email to anybody who's on the webinar live with us, and then anyone who views the archived webinar at a later date, you can also get the certificate if you just email me, kimberly.berry@okstate.edu. And we'll go ahead and get started with our presentation. Hello, Angela. I'm going to actually change this so you can share your screen. Let's see.
Okay.
So I'm going to stop sharing, and then let's see if you're able to share your screen and your PowerPoint.
Just double click that green. Did perfect. You did.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for having me today. We are going to be talking a little bit about Universal Design for Learning and classroom applications. So when we're looking at Universal Design for Learning, we know it's a strategy to have teachers engage all learners in the classroom. So students perceive lesson content and demonstrate their understanding in multiple ways. And that way, students are intrinsically motivated to become engaged in the content that they are learning.
Hey, Angela, would you like to make your slides be the just the slide view?
Okay.
We're seeing the notes, and I wonder if it will be better if we see just the slide view, because it'll take up more screen room. If you're able to do that.
That sounds great.
Okay.
Can you share?
We'll click that one and see what happens.
Okay.
There we go.
Oh, that's
I
good.
think that'll be easier to read. Thank you.
Yeah, we can see
We
it.
have multiple monitors, so I evidently selected the wrong one. Okay, so today as we look at our lesson objectives, we're going to be recognizing the definition of Universal Design for Learning. And Universal Design for Learning is based on the 3 different learning networks of the brain. Specific examples of these would be multiple means of representation. So that means how students learn the content and what information they will be learning. Multiple means of action and expression, and that demonstrates how students will acquire the new content that they are learning. And finally, how the students will be engaged. So how will they demonstrate and be intrinsically motivated to learn the content based on maybe their interests or preferences. So Kimberly had acknowledged that this is quite a mouthful, but it's very important. When you think about Universal Design for Learning, we want to be conscious that it's federal law that was included with the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008. And it's a scientifically valid framework, and it guides educational practice. It still continues to be relevant for the new law with the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was in 2015, and includes the definition and endorsement of Universal Design for Learning. It was the 7th reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Act of 1965, which was originally passed to address the need for greater equity and opportunity in public schools. Here on this slide, you can see that it provides flexibility in the way information is presented. So again, how students will acquire the information, how it will be demonstrated to them, and how students will be engaged in the learning process. The second point of this is that it reduces barriers in instruction, because we're looking at students, not just students with disabilities, but how all students receive the content and how they are engaged with the learning experience. And that would include students with disabilities and students who are limited English proficient. When we talk a little bit about what Universal Design for Learning is, I like to give the background content about, a definition, and an appropriate definition would be using multiple delivery methods to help students retain the what is being learned, designing quality instruction from the very beginning. So not after the fact, after you know your learners or halfway through the lesson. Yes, sometimes you can adapt and adjust as necessary, but it's quite helpful to be mindful about, how will I know students will be learning the information and how do I want them to be engaged? It also provides multiple learning opportunities for students to demonstrate the material presented and has opportunities for them to be participants in the lesson through their own experiences or preferences. Today we're going to be talking specifically about the diagram here, and this diagram is based off of the research at CAST, and that is the Center for Applied Learning, and that's cast.org. It's based on the theories of the brain and how the brain processes and receives information. So one area of the brain processes information on what we are learning, and that's the multiple means of representation. Through our slides today, we are going to give several examples on how there are different means of representing information to students. And one of the bullet points under that would be options for perception, options for language and symbols, and options for comprehension. As you can see in the next bulleted area is a different learning network of the brain, and that's the multiple means of action and expression. And that's just how students are engaged with the lesson and how they are interacting with the lesson. And you can see our 3 bullet points there are the options for physical action, options for expression and communication, and options for executive function. And finally, the last series of what we will be talking about today is the learning network of the brain that addresses our affective network. How are we engaged to address what our learning preferences are or our interests? And those are through the means of options of recruiting interest, options for sustaining effort, and options for self-regulation. So again, there's 3 overarching elements of universal design for learning principles, and we're going to address all 3 in more detail. So the first one is the multiple means of representation. If you remember, it's the how students or the what students will be learning with their content. And the first thing that we're going to be looking at is offering students options for perception. So how do they perceive the information? And one of those ways would be maybe having access to audio. You can see on the left-hand side here, there's a screen of a voice amplification system. When you're thinking having students in a classroom having opportunities to have access to audio, it's not necessarily just the teacher themselves having access to the audio, but the fellow classmates. If sound needs to be amplified, it's not just for the teacher addressing the content, but maybe the students providing responses towards the interaction within this learning community. And of course, on the right-hand side, we also see if a teacher would be using video, it would be important to address closed captioning because it may address students with learning difficulties, but it could help enhance the learning opportunity for English language learners or students that may be struggling with vocabulary terms. They can see what the word is and have a second way of learning the content.
Angela, when I first saw your slide there, I was thinking about a little girl who we're helping at the Child Development Lab at Oklahoma State University. And she has to have one of these voice amplification systems because she does not have adequate breath support to be able to support speech for people to be able to hear her. And I thought, and this is the first example when I thought something that could be used for all, UDL, something that she needs makes it assistive technology. And it may not be AT for everybody, but for her it would, because otherwise nobody could hear what she was saying. So I loved that you put that, the picture depicts that it's on the kiddo and not on the teacher, which is where we normally see it.
Yeah. This other options for perception could include, very simple devices. The previous slide talked a little bit about technology, but here, having options for perception do not have to be expensive in nature. Students, when they're reading content, it could be something simple as just a bookmark, maybe just a white piece of paper at the high school level. When you're looking at a reading tracker, you're trying to minimize the additional text that exists on the page and bring focus to the content that the student is learning. It may be something simple as what you see here on the left-hand side, a popsicle stick with some kind of decorative item to help the students track along the text. It could be just their finger But sometimes having students interact with a tool that they find creative and interest specific to them would allow them to use that and be interested in that learning opportunity. On the bottom right-hand side, you can see how just adding an additional component, something simple as an E, engages the students in a learning activity where they're learning about different vowel sounds, and they're using that strategy to apply it for a different skill, a long vowel, short vowel. Also, when we're looking at options for perception, similar to tracking on our previous slide, we're looking at opportunities to minimize the text around the information that the student is acquiring. Here we have an example of reading masks, and they can be in several different varieties. On the left-hand side, we have a reading tracker, and that's just it's very similar to a bookmark.
One of the things I telling Angela before she started was, we have a set of these, and they have colored overlays that create the window for the text, which sometimes when needed, it creates the contrast with the text that a person needs to then access it. So I love your things there, and they're super inexpensive, like most of all of these ideas are for people to just make or buy.
That's exactly right. The whole intent behind this is that some students just may need opportunities to minimize the text that they are looking, so they're not overwhelmed about the amount of material that they're expected to do. So even when you're thinking about middle school or high school students, something simple as using sticky notes to minimize the external amount of information, or on the bottom right-hand side, we see just a paper folded in different areas to, just focus on problems 1 and 2. We'll get to the rest a little bit later, or folding a paper in half and say, okay, just complete the first half of the paper. We'll do the rest at a different time. So that was the intent behind options of perception within the reading masks example. At the elementary level, we can also talk a little bit about tactile books. Basically, there are interactive books that help students use a different sense, through the sense of touch to interact with some of the materials that they would be learning. On the top right-hand picture, you can see that they can feel the buttons to count the number 10 and have an interactive way to assign the quantity with the actual number that they would do one-to-one correspondence with. So there's several different examples that are here on the screen. Basically, it's just providing an access for perception of an abstract concept in a more concrete format, whether it's when you're talking a little bit about the texture and you're talking about smooth and rough. Well, an abstract concept are the terms smooth and rough, but when you actually apply it and they are able to feel the difference between smooth and rough, it gives a better understanding about what that concept might be. So again, thinking back to what our content here is today, we're talking about universal design for learning. So having these type of elements available for all students is quite helpful when you are introducing concepts to students.
I was going to tell you one thing, Angela, but do you know what wiki sticks are?
Yeah,
I know you
yeah.
have kiddos. Okay. What we have done too is use wiki sticks to like take a book that might not have already been adapted and trace the hill that's theirs to give kind of a tactile helps for those kiddos who need that tactile ability to get the concept, and for kiddos who have vision impairments and can't see what it is that you're talking about. So it lets you adapt a book that might not otherwise have been adapted that way.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And basically,
the concept free was at Rib Crib.
Oh, great. On this slide, we're looking at alternate ways of how information is perceived. So in the previous examples, we're looking at actual content of material. So we're looking at, a handout. Well, you can also vary the way that information is presented by looking at the colors that are used as a mat on top of the material that is being presented. Sometimes students, if they have a favorite color, they can use something simple as a piece of construction paper, and then it would help bring attention to the assignment that needs to be completed. On the left-hand side here, we have colored placemats. You can use something like that. Some of our students, they may need a positional device, such as a laptop table or a TV tray or an iPad wedge. Basically, you're bringing content specific to that student based on their need, but if all other students may just find that that may be helpful to them, it's a device or material item that can be available for all learners. Specific to a classroom environment and how helping students perceive information, it's very good as a classroom teacher to be mindful of the classroom environment that is that students are learning. And sometimes the overhead fluorescent lights can be very problematic for some of our learners. It can give them headaches. It can, you know, just when you are thinking about the type of lighting, sometimes it can create its own atmosphere or mood for a particular environment. You can think something as simple as Christmas lights or different types of light bulbs themselves create a different environment. Also, examples on this slide are just protectors that go over fluorescent light coverings, and they are manufactured specifically to go over those fluorescent light bulbs. But I would certainly check with your staff to make sure that those are, in regulation with your fire codes. Allison, did you want to provide any input on the different types of lighting?
I love that you put all of these. You really covered the different things. I would say the only other thing I thought of just now is that there is some research to show that some of those colors help certain kiddos, whether they have dyslexia, whether they have ADHD. And so looking up some of that research before you choose a color, if you're, going to be picking one at random versus I am interested in why they did the 3 colors, for example, on the one.
Yeah.
But just know, because it might not impact others, but there may be one kiddo it would, and we could choose for them and everybody else could benefit. But otherwise, I love you have your fluorescents covered, you have your lamps and everything.
Yeah, and I think you can also be intuitive when you are providing this in your classroom, that maybe different times during the day, after lunch, we're going to dim our lights and have more of a quiet time so that we have enough light to read if we're doing a silent sustained reading time, but, more mindful that it's a different type of learning time where we're going to be attentive to a skill.
Yeah.
As we talked a little bit about before, we have options for perception that may include the different types of colors in order to perceive information. We have options for colored overlays. It may be something simple as the templates that were used. On this screen, we have it in different colors. It may be something like 3D glasses, like colored glasses. Sometimes when you want to introduce a new object to students, and you want to increase their level of enthusiasm towards a new project, you may introduce flashlights. Flashlights just may say, okay, highlight the vocabulary word and find it in our classroom somewhere around here. And also, we have an example here of a magnifying glass. Sometimes with technology, we can zoom in and increase the magnification, but something simple as having tools available for students that are using paper pencil format, they can utilize that to perceive the information a little bit easier.
We also have a really cool mini light box. I'm just getting all these cool thoughts as I look at your things. Some of the things I thought of ahead of time, but versus the flashlight where you shine the light on top of, the mini light box shines the light from underneath. So you can put things like those color overlays, you can put shapes, you can put all sorts of things. And it's that other way to interact or perceive whatever the concept is of the lesson. So those are really cool.
Yeah, that's neat. So we're going to move on down towards, again, we're looking still at the multiple means of representation of what you want students to learn. So we're going to move on down to options for language and symbols. When you're looking at options for language and symbols, it's very good to think about the type of devices that students have to interact with the task at hand. So sometimes the use of manipulatives when you're talking with math can help students, again, what we said before, have an abstract concept to bring more concrete examples. And examples in the elementary setting may be counting bears, coin money, linking blocks, counting sticks, a number line, an addition chart. Any one of those examples may help students as they are learning a skill help them bring that abstract concept. Now, it's not something we would necessarily provide them on a testing day, but what is happening is that they are using and interacting with those tools to acquire the concept of how to do that item, and then maybe later on develop the ability to do it independently. Similar, I wanted to provide an example of sub or different items that could be included in a high school element. So when you're thinking about middle school, high school, older age students, we've moved beyond counting bears and counting money, but, having those concrete items are still applicable. So it could be something simple as using a calculator or diagram that may be listed along the classroom wall, maybe a key of commonly used formulas that students may have on their desk. We have examples here of posters that may help demonstrate a specific concept of an abstract skill that the students are learning about. Here are the examples of the periodic table or an example of a plant cell. When you're teaching students the concept of division, sometimes having that base knowledge of multiplication, you need to have that in order to know that skill of division. And the skill no longer is can you do your multiplication facts? The skill is, do you know how to process the information for a division problem? So having them have access to a multiplication table reduces the barrier for that specific learning activity. And also, just think about access to resources within a classroom itself. If you want students to have access to dictionaries or other tools within the classroom, they are at the discipline and ability of the students to use as they feel needed.
We do have some pretty cool calculators too.
Yeah.
Like the talking calculators or the big key
Mm-hmm.
calculators, which I think most people like those big key calculators because they're really fun to hit the buttons. It's like humongous.
Other options for language and symbols as we are thinking about more of a reading instruction activity. Of course, you have your black and white books with printed text, but other alternatives exist. I mean, you can have text printed and available for students on an iPod or iPad. There are these devices called playaways, and basically it's similar to like a recorded cassette tape, but basically it's a device. It has one book on that device, and students just plug in headphones and they're able to play the device to listen to a particular story. Similar to that would be books on a computer. Here is an example of a library of book titles that a student could interact with.
We actually love to tell people about all these things you're already putting here. One thing to remember looking at, for example, like the CD player, the tape player, that kind of thing, is these days a lot of the higher tech technology lets you navigate quickly, so you can bookmark parts, places where you are in a book, or you can just go straight to that section, and that really helps when you have trouble maybe accessing or flipping your pages through your book, that sort of thing, to let you navigate digitally. So you can do that on some of these devices.
So when we think about the acquisition of language, we're looking at how a student is able to improve their reading fluency. Now, sometimes it could be using external devices, like we have a lot of different electronic examples here, but on the bottom left-hand corner, we have something simple as just buddying up with a peer tutor, maybe the same age peer, to have them read aloud to that student and increase their own reading fluency. So there are a lot of different options. As we move on down towards other areas of how material can be represented to students, now most likely teachers are commonly using a lecture style format for delivering their content of instruction. And that continues to be a valid practice on delivering instruction. But the point on this slide is there are alternate ways students can acquire information. And sometimes students can learn from a video example, maybe a short clip to expand on a concept that's being learned, or even to introduce an unknown concept. On the bottom left, we see students engaged in a lesson by having them actually interact physically with a skit or an activity. And also we have students on the bottom right engaged in the field trip experience, where they are putting themselves in the actual experience of that content. So now we move into a different area within three principles of Universal Design for Learning. And our next principle is the more common means of action and expression. Previously, we talked a little bit about what they are learning. Now we are talking about how they are learning. How are you going to have students show to you that they know and are able to demonstrate that skill? So the first bullet point here is the options for physical action. On the top left corner, we have a picture of a beach ball question. This is a very simple way for students to be engaged in a different way than just popcorn answers of a teacher asking a student's response for questions throughout a lesson to gauge their level of understanding. This is just a simple way of having a beach ball blown up, different questions written on it, thrown around the classroom. Whoever catches it, their hand lands on a question and they're able to answer that question. And so it's a way to engage students' interest, engagement, but also to really engage students in a physical manner. In the middle, you see a teacher engaging her students through song. So pneumatic devices quite often are helpful to produce formulas to long-term memory, so it can be easily recalled later. The whiteboard in the right-hand corner is not just for a teacher. It can be for students to show demonstration of their knowledge. They get up out of their seats, they engage with fellow classmates, and they show their level of knowledge in front of everyone to see. So there's a sense of urgency that I got to get this right. On the bottom left-hand corner, we see a three-dimensional object being created out of straws and masking tape. So they're working together to create a triangular prism. So sometimes that concept is really hard to convey on a two-dimensional piece of paper. So as students are engaging together and developing that model, they have a better understanding of, oh, there's a triangle on top and bottom, and then the three sides are rectangular in format. In the middle left, bottom middle picture, we see a counting cube with a class. It can be something simple as a dice that is being rolled around and helping students learn numbers and number relationships. You could actually add in a second ball and you could have students either focus on addition skills or multiplication concepts. And then my favorite is the bottom right, which is guess the word. Students are interacting physically with a lesson. They're highly engaged, highly motivated. There's some vocabulary words on their forehead, and their peers tell them either the definition or adjectives to describe the word that's on their forehead. So it's highly motivating for students to participate in that lesson. The whole point of this is that students are physically involved with the lesson and they are demonstrating their knowledge to you other than just paper pencil. We have here several different options for expression and communication. And I'm going to let Allison talk specifically about this slide because there are several different options that AbleTech may have.
We do. When I am looking at your pictures, we actually give away the claw pencil grip that's at the top picture to folks who come to our trainings, and they love them. It's really funny, but our OT would have a lot to say about a lot of these, but truly just changing the size of the pencil, the weight of the pencil, that it might be, in this case, not just a pencil, a pen or a crayon, making those triangular ones just gives them another way to hold it. When you get down to the higher tech, the iPad, computer, any of those devices, even phones and iPod touches, they have that option of dictation, which is an awesome option when needed. And it's the text-to-speech option. You can also, I feel like it's important to tell people that it's also called speech recognition. So on different devices, it's called different things. Just allows the person to talk out their thoughts and have them, or I'm sorry, in this case, have the text read aloud. Dictation, though, is the opposite. It's having your speech put into text. So, but all of these are great ways of expression. And the other thing I was going to add is symbols, and I know some of that comes next, but there's so many ways to get out of a person what is in their brain. So I love this slide a lot.
And we're not talking just for learners that need that device. When we're talking again about universal design for learning, These elements can be available in a tray somewhere in the classroom, and they can pick the color pen that they want to use that day, or the large or small pencil type. So when we're thinking about this, think about these are devices and tools that all learners may have access to.
Love that.
Options for executive functions sometimes have to do with a concrete schedule. That may be a schedule simple as a schedule that is on a student's desk. It may have picture elements for students that may struggle with the reading element itself. So it's a visual diagram of what their school day might look like. Some classrooms have a visual schedule somewhere in their classroom for the whole class to know where we are in the sequence of activities for the day, and it helps them self-regulate how much more time I have to complete an activity, or acknowledging, where I am in the sequence of events for the day. The student planner is sometimes a valuable tool for keeping students accountable for homework assignments and seeing if they've completed those assignments in the time that they have been provided, or whether they need to continue that assignment at home. We also have on the left-hand side here several different examples of visual timers. They're on the internet, several different stopwatches or time, clocks that count down the time. Or we have here on the left-hand corner a time tracker, which counts down the time but gives it also in a color format to help students regulate how much more time they have. And I believe Kimberly was saying something about, you have to monitor your class about whether that colored device or stopwatch may be appropriate for some of your learners. Because sometimes that may produce more anxiety than may be helpful. And I think that's important to point out. You need to know your learners of, I want to help you regulate your time. Would it be best if I have a set of timers and I give students that need 10 minutes the 10-minute timer, and then students that may need 5 minutes? There are sand timers available that you can purchase that have different allotments of time.
That's good. I love that bottom timer because it's free. You just Google that. Free online time timer.
Yeah,
Adults like that too.
Our third component of Universal Design for Learning is multiple means of engagement. So we talked a little bit about what students are learning, how they are going to be engaged, and now we are talking a little bit about options for students to be in a lesson based on their preferences and interests. So the first element here is, you want to get students engaged. How are we going to hook students into the lesson? One of those options would be to make sure students are comfortable. There are several different options for flexible seating, and the point here is that flexible seating is not just solely only for one person that may need it in the classroom. Options are available for all learners. And I think my favorite example here is the left-hand corner of students just popping down in a laundry basket.
Laundry basket, yeah.
It could be absolutely anything, to provide students options to perceive information and feel comfortable in the classroom. When we talk a little bit about options for sustaining effort, when we think about how students acquire information for language and reading ability, we're thinking about fluency practice and that learning through skill of just doing it multiple times. Sometimes when they just hear that they have to do the same skill over and over, it may be hard for them to be engaged with that concept because they're like, I've done it once, I don't have to do it again. But if you find a way to get students engaged, there are mediums out there to have students become more fluent readers. And it may be something simple as using PVC pipe. There are tools out there called a whisper phone, and students are able to hear their voice aloud. It's very simple. It's almost like an echo machine where they hear it aloud at that moment and are able to have that option for, okay, I want to engage in this lesson for fluency, and I can do it for a longer period of time without this device. For our older students, it may be something as using a video camera or a cassette recorder. And then also we have a microphone that can be recorded, and having students play it back and see how they do with their fluency level, and record it again, seeing if they can improve that. Here we have options for self-regulation, and when we talk a little bit about options for self-regulation, we're talking a little bit about how a teacher generates a lesson to engage students in showing and demonstrating a skill. And so what is the method that students are going to show and demonstrate that knowledge back to the classroom teacher? In the middle example, you can see our typical way and method for students demonstrating their knowledge would be a written assignment. But on the bottom right, it could be having a student pair up with another student, and the teacher has provided guided discussion questions, so they are using one another to increase their level of knowledge. Sometimes just teaching one another is just another way of showing that they have learned and acquired that information. And uh, the other pictures on this slide represent graphic organizers, a group template. Sometimes students that may master a skill, they may need a template that's not filled out at all, but some students may want a template that is partially or almost wholly completed, and they have to complete the missing information. So you can level that group template available towards the learners in your classroom. And sometimes, you know your learners and know how they learn. You can actually self-appoint the templates available for those students, but sometimes it may be that you have 3 templates available and they pick the one that they feel most comfortable. Our other example on this slide would be students are working together to create some type of documentation using technology. And here it's an example of creating a PowerPoint together. So as we wrap up this particular session, we're wanting to emphasize that we talked a little bit about 3 universal design for learning principles, but all 3 are not necessarily intended to be incorporated into every single lesson, but it guides your instruction over time. When we're thinking about what students are going to learn, how students are going to learn, and how they're going to be engaged with that lesson, it's good to think on the forefront when you're designing your lesson about, is this a good lesson plan that I've developed, or does it need an area of improvement to get my students engaged? So again, it's not all 3. I don't have to change my practice overnight. And sometimes when you think about it, universal design for learning is just good teaching practice. You may already be doing a lot of these elements yourself and didn't even know that it had a term associated with it. So I think it's familiarizing yourself with the language and the concept of what the research from CAST has produced. The second bullet down here also addresses that using the principles of universal design for learning does not give an exception that you no longer have to consider accommodations for your students. Universal design for learning is for all students and provides access for concepts for all students. But students who have severe or just special education needs and have accommodations addressed on their IEP, they need to have specific accommodations to address their area of disability. So again, lesson design using principles of universal design for learning, but also knowing your learners who may need additional accommodations is very much appropriate. We have this universal design for learning guideline handout. This handout is produced by CAST, and it talks a little bit about the 3 principles in more detail. So today we talked a little bit about the 3 areas: multiple means of representation, action and expression, and engagement. And then if you see each of the rows, it says here, provide options for perception, provide options for language and mathematical expression and symbols. You can see all of those 9 elements. We talked specifically about all 9 elements and provided classroom examples of how those would be utilized. So if you have any other information or questions pertaining to Universal Design for Learning, this is our contact information, and we're more than happy to help answer some of the questions that you have towards implementation of Universal Design for Learning.
Very good, Angela. I know, I want to clap too. I think you took that chart. I've seen that chart before, but your pictures and the way that you described it helped make all of those words make a whole lot of sense. What does that actually mean?
And I think
awesome.
that comes with classroom experience. I've been in the position to know, what classroom teachers use and design a lesson. And I really wanted to focus on what teachers may already be doing and attribute it to one of those principles from, the Universal Design for Learning's guidelines.
That's perfect. That's what we found a lot is they're doing it. They might just not even know that they're doing it.
Exactly, that's right.
Hey, now would be a really great time if any of our participants have questions. You can type them in the chat, and we can pose your questions to Allison and Angela. We can see what we can come up with. And Angela, if you don't mind stopping sharing your PowerPoint, I'll bring up our other PowerPoint. Thank you. There we go. All right. Let's see. I have to see my chat again. Nobody has asked any questions in the chat yet. Perhaps, is anyone wanting to be unmuted?
And maybe some of our participants might have additional examples of how they believe they've incorporated Universal Design for Learning, also. So just not necessarily questions, but additional feedback for all other participants about other ideas they might have.
Absolutely. No one is typing in the chat. Here we do. Okay. Lisa is asking, will the handouts be available for us to copy? Definitely. I can share Angela's PowerPoint, and we can give you the link to the CAST website so that you can print those out. Or do you have a better place to get those from, Angela?
I believe it would be best for the copy of the PowerPoint, and then since we had the link for the Universal Design for Learning's guidelines handout, maybe highlighting that. If you open that directly, that's the actual PDF document that would be a good starting place for wanting to use Universal Design for Learning.
That's good.
Very good. Okay, well, as we're wrapping up, I wanted to invite everyone to be sure and join us for our next webinar. We have AT Meets IT, Chromebooks and Chrome Browser. That's going to be Tuesday, December 5th, same time, 3:45 to 4:30 p.m. You'll discover how Chromebooks and the Google Chrome browser can be used as assistive technology to improve educational outcomes for students with disabilities. I do have the link there. It's also on the AbleTech website for anyone who wants to join us for that. And again, if you need a certificate for your presentation today, I'm going to email it to those of you who are with us live. I believe I do have all your email addresses. Anyone who is viewing the archived recording, just email me at kimberly.berry@okstate.edu, or you can call and request a certificate. And here is our contact information here at AbleTech. You can email Allison. It's allison.robinson@okstate.edu. Her direct line is 405-744-4608. I'm also there, kimberly.berry@okstate.edu, 405-744-8342. Or you can always call our main line, which is 800-257-1705. And then our website, where you can find all of these resources, our webinars, our information about our AT support team training, AT discovery, search our inventory, all these other things you can find at okabletech.okstate.edu. So, thanks to Angela Kwok so much for being our presenter today.
Yeah,
well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it very much.
And thanks to Allison for co-hosting, giving great comments. And thanks also to Jeanette Christian. She's our captioner, did a wonderful job captioning, and TCS interpreting. And I do hope that you all will have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you next time.